This video is with Skip Sligh. Skip has bought and sold over 200 farms in the last 20 years and has seen a lot of things, and we get to listen to some of his insight, learn some of his lessons, and I think that this is a really strong conversation for anyone wanting to learn more about land, managing it, and just a great conversation. So I hope you guys really enjoy it. My name is Jake Hofer. I'm the co-owner of Exodus and a real estate broker here in the state of Illinois. And I have something really cool. If you want this free book from Pat Porter, who's been a guest of the show in the past, and so he sent me a box of these, and I'm sending these out to anyone that signs up for the email newsletter in the description below. Go in there and I'll send you a personal email, get your address, and ship it to you for free. So really cool opportunity to learn a little bit more beyond this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We have highlights from this coming out, so keep an eye out for that. If you enjoy the video, hit the like button and subscribe. Let's get right into it. Here we go. All right, welcome, Skip. I'm pumped for this conversation. Justin Hollinsworth gets all the credit for lining this up, so I appreciate Justin making the intro. And
he's a good guy.
I've done some homework for this conversation, and I'm hoping that it helps a lot of people here in their land endeavors. But you're from Michigan, you moved to Iowa, and I'll let you take an opportunity to introduce you from there, and we'll dive right into it.
So I grew up in Michigan, and I was there till I was 22. And I got into hunting just going out to like my buddies' places out of town. So I grew up in the city, and I'd go to friends' places, and they'd be on farms, and they'd let me hunt and shoot guns. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. And when I was about maybe 10 to 12 years old, my uncle had a piece of ground outside of town, and he was getting really, really old. But he's like, hey, I used to hunt. He's like, if you want to go out there, you can. It wasn't a lot of acres, but it was a nice piece of woods. And so my dad would bring me out there, or my mom, and they drop me off, sometimes hang out with me a little bit, let me shoot guns. And then my uncle died. And I told the family, I said, we can't sell this. And they said, well, too bad. You can buy it. And my grandpa said, hey, we're going to sell it. And, this is how things go. And I was maybe 12 years old, maybe 13-ish. So I had nowhere to go other than asking my buddies from school, can we hang out? Can we hang out? Can we hang out really to go out hunting, goof around? And then I'd go out to public land, and it was like a single family household. My mom would drop me off at like public ground, and I'd just walk around, and I was a disastrous hunter starting out. I mean, the worst hunter you could ever imagine. But I came straight from the city, and I just started walking around, and I got into bow hunting from church camp. So they'd have archery at church camp. So I thought that was cool. So I got a bow in town, and I shoot it at a hay bale in my backyard, or a little bow target. And then my buddies are like, hey, were you squirrel hunted? I wanted to squirrel hunt. So I started squirrel hunting, and they're like, you could go hunt for deer with that bow. So I just started walking around looking for deer. And so basically, to go full circle here, about 13 and 14 years old, I was determined I wanted to buy land. Since my uncle's ground was gone. Mm-hmm. The public land was just awful. I mean, I'd go out there and see way more hunters than rabbits or deer or anything. Usually didn't see a deer. So I started a lawn business and started mowing lawns. And then I started saving my money because, again, we had a bunch of kids, not much money coming in at all. So I'd help with the house payment for a little while to get us by there. Yeah, when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was bad. Mm-hmm. It was bad. We were in rough shape. But, so I'd give part of my money to my mom for the house payment, and then I'd put a little bit away. And somebody's like, hey, go downtown and go to Edward D. Jones and open up a little investment account. So I'd go there with my lawn mowing money, and I bring them like $20, $50, and $100, just little bits every so often. And then I got a better job through college, and like waiting tables, delivering pizzas, working in factories. I mean, I worked every job known to man. I was the cart boy at Walmart, Stockman Skip. So I pushed carts at Walmart. Uh-huh. And during this time, though, I had to save for college, and then I wanted to save for land. So I keep putting a little bit into Edward D. Jones, like $500, $1,000. So fast forward to college, I'm putting myself through college in Michigan, and then I'm working enough where I can actually put a little bit more away towards land. And I got internships, and I worked for like Kellogg cereal company, worked for Steelcase. It was they make like office furniture and stuff like that. Good paying internship. So I kept stashing money away. And the internships were kind of boring. So they give you a lot of work, and then you'd run out of time. And they'd be like, well, just, see what you can do. And I'd spend time looking up land, and I'd research land from maybe on my breaks. It was on my breaks.
Okay.
So on my breaks every day, I was at a computer, and I got to just look at land. And there was only like 2 or 3 big real estate sites out there. And I just look through this land and just dream about it. And I mean, I'd looked at these great big farms that were for sale, and not even possible, but I just run the numbers and think about where I wanted to buy land. And then finally, when I graduated college at 22, I got a job in the pharmaceutical industry. So I made pretty good money out of college. I mean, nothing great, but decent. And I had about, I think, 35,000 saved up. So
that's a lot for a 22-year-old out of college.
Yeah.
That's a boatload.
It was a chunk of money, and I needed 40,000. So I wanted to get 40,000. So I had this apartment that was like, call it $700 a month. And I was like, well, if I got a roommate in this little apartment, then it's $350 a month, and then I can split the utilities. So that sped it up. So like 4 or 5 months after I graduated, I had enough for the down payment on a farm, and I wanted to be in Iowa. We had gone all over the country hunting on a budget, just like motel in a Honda Accord. We went to Kansas and Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, all over Michigan. I mean, we just went all over the Midwest just on a major budget. So I decided I wanted to buy ground in Iowa. And where I had permission to hunt in Iowa, I'd hunted there during college a couple times. And I put a little note up in a gas station in town by where we hunted. And it just said, hey, looking to buy land. If you have anything, call me. And I did this in like 5 different shops, like the co-op and gas station, stuff like that.
That's genius.
And the next week I got a call. And my brother, I was talking to my brother. He said, I think we got to look at this. He goes, I remember that track. So I drove down from Michigan the next morning, and I had an agreement by lunchtime the next morning on 80 acres in Van Buren County, Jefferson County, actually, Iowa. And I think it was 22 or 23. So that would have been like 20 years ago.
Wow. So how much did you pay for that 80 then?
It was 115,000, which actually at the time I'm like, I remember saying to the guy, the rest of the stuff out there is like, should be like 90 to 95,000.
Yeah.
But the farm was so cool. It was right across the street from where I shot a really big buck first year I hunted in Iowa. It was literally across the street. And I remember seeing big bucks over there. And I said, geez, this is just perfect. So I said, well, it's my first farm. I can afford it. And the bank's like, yeah, if you put $40,000 down and you can finance the rest. And it was some high interest rate. I can't even remember what it was. But yeah, and that 80 was maybe half timber, half rough, tillable, rough. And that was the 80 I was going to keep for the rest of my life. Me and my 2 brothers, I said, we're going to keep this for the rest of our lives. It didn't quite work out that way, but that's how I started.
That's interesting. So what also was interesting is your pharmaceutical, were you in sales then with the pharmaceuticals? That's a common theme with some of the people that have been on here. Sales is one, owning a construction business is another, or, or people that have multiple jobs. Do you think the pharmaceutical sales gave you an opportunity to build up a pretty good income as a younger professional, or not so much?
Yeah. So I was graduating with a dual degree. It was business and engineering, and I was more geared towards engineering. So I was working at Kellogg, and I was analyzing all their production stuff, and I was bored out of my mind. So I'm talking to my coworkers at Kellogg, and they're like, "What do you think? You want to come work here?" And I'm like, "No, I can't sit in a cubicle. There's no way I'll sit in a cubicle. I can't take it. So one of my coworkers, he goes, you know what my brother does? I said, what? He said, he's a pharmaceutical rep. I said, what's that? He said, so you just drive around and go talk to doctors about medication. I go, really? No office. He's, you know, his boss isn't with him. He said, gets a car, he brings lunch in and just talks to him about medications. And I said, that sounds really cool. I said, does he make good money? He said, yeah, pretty good money. And to me, it was really good money. Okay. It was like with a bonus, maybe like $60,000 a year, plus a car, plus a cell phone. And for a broke college kid, that was pretty good. So,
Yeah.
you know, so it was good money, and I didn't have all these other expenses. You know, they paid for a vehicle, they paid for a computer, all the other stuff. So, and what was nice about it, being my own boss, or not my own boss, but, you know, having the freedom I did, is I could bust my tail and maybe have some extra time at the end of the day to deal with land stuff. Or if I needed to duck out on a Thursday night, and go down and look at farms and spend an extra day, I could. I had a lot of flexibility with that job, and I wasn't married, didn't have a girlfriend, nothing. So that part gave me a lot of opportunity. So it was a good income. It was not a crazy high income.
Okay.
I mean, $60,000 even back then. I mean, it was good. But it's not like a lot of money where I could just go buy 5 different farms or something. But
Sure.
it did give me a lot of flexibility too. And I think that the pharmaceutical lasted maybe like 2 years, and it was kind of, I don't know. It was a little bit corny for me. So I switched into medical device sales, which is a little more, it was better paying. It was a little more serious. And I just felt like it had a lot more interest to me, and it was a lot more challenging. So I got into the medical device side of things. And really I'm like, hey, if I can make XYZ more money, I can buy that much more farms. So I was constantly thinking the angle of all the extra things I could do to make money to buy more land.
I love that. Yeah, that's what kept you going. So you bought that first farm as you're 22, 23 years old. And then
Yep,
how long
I'm 43 now.
How long did you stay in Michigan before you moved to Iowa?
It was like a year. So when I wanted to quit pharmaceuticals, I was talking to Johnson & Johnson, one of their medical device divisions, and they're like, hey, we've got this territory open up in Iowa. I said, oh, Iowa. And they basically offered me the job. So I moved to Des Moines, and I already had that farm down there. I definitely did not tell them I had the farm down there. Nor did I tell them for the next 10 years that I was buying farms like I was. But and now I'm not employed, and I don't ever want to be employed ever again. So I can say this stuff honestly.
Yeah.
But and I worked my tail off at my job, and I was very good at balancing both. I mean, if I wasn't extremely effective at my job, I would not have lasted. I worked for Johnson & Johnson for 10 years, but again, at the time I wasn't married, no kids, so I could just focus on my job and focus on my farms. So I moved to Iowa, and I gave every bit of my effort to my job. Every bit of spare time was hanging out with friends and working on my farm. I mean, every weekend was down at the farm, improving them, and then later on buying more farms.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So, you know, you kind of alluded to, you know, you bought that 80 and you said, oh, this is the only piece of ground I'll ever need. And you and I both know that is not how that played out. So you bought that. What happened? Did you get bored? Did you get more ambitious to buy more? What happened?
So I said, we're never going to sell this. And I always called the farm our farm with my younger brothers. I mean, one of them he was still in high school. And I'm like, this is our farm. And we, you know, all 3 of us did stuff together and went out there and fixed it up. But I was looking at 80 acres that had big deer. I mean, to me, it was big deer. And I had never experienced anything like that before. So when you go from like, you know, permission ground and occasionally a lease that was decent, I mean, decent at best, and over 100 public land and spots where we didn't see deer for a whole week, to go to this 80 acres that was actually pretty sweet, you're like, this is it. This is it. This is the greatest thing ever. So I love the farm. And then I made enough money where I could buy the farm across the street. And I mean, it was tight, but I bought this 126 acres across
Was
the
that the
street.
one you shot your deer on the year before?
I think I shot a deer on all these farms. I mean, I got a good buck probably every year. We did. I mean, we shot good bucks, and we'd go to Kansas too. I mean, I'd probably shoot, with all the out of state hunts, I'd probably shoot 2 or 3 good bucks every year. Same with my brothers. So certain years we'd shoot 1 or 2 bucks each. But yeah, we shot good bucks off every one of these farms. And these older people across the road said they'd sell. So I was buying that, and I actually bought it, and I had the 80 and I had this 126. And this guy from town, who's a businessman, quite a bit older, had a lot more money than I did, said, "Hey, I love what you did with this 80 acres. I've been here my whole life. I know this farm." He said, "Would you ever sell it?" And I said, maybe. And he's like, the market had come up, and I had redone this place from head to toe. I mean, head to toe, tore this place apart. It was really, really good after it probably took 2 years. I mean, but I put everything into it, maybe 3. And I had a 200-inch typical that my brother shot through the neck. Totally fine. I mean, never got that deer, but we did get some really nice deer out there. So he offers me like double what I paid for it. And I'm like, So before I said yes, I called up the neighbor to my 126. And I said, "Hey, would you sell that 130 that borders me?" He said, "Yeah." And it was high, but it was still less per acre than what I was selling that 80 for. So I said, "Okay." So I called the guy back. I said, "Hey, you got a deal." And then I immediately bought this 130 on my west side. And then a week after that, there was a landlocked 10-acre piece in the center that an attorney had because somebody didn't pay their bill. And the people who I bought the farm from said, "You need to call that guy." So I called that attorney a week later. He said, "Well, why don't you meet me down here and we'll talk about it?" He said, "Here's the deal. I don't really have access to it, but I could get access to it. I don't want it." He said, "How about $5,000 for the 10 acres?" I said, "Okay, deal." And then I sold $10,000 worth of logs off it like a week later. So
off the 10 or off the
off
other
the 10 acres.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, very, very conservative cut. I mean, I was very conservative with what I did, but I knew before I bought it. I mean, I was out there and I looked at the white oak out there. And I mean,
just
it was
old growth.
Yes. And we went in there and took the stuff that just needed to come out.
Before it hollowed out.
Yeah, exactly. And the guy helping me out at the time, because I didn't know about logging back then, he's like, "Yeah, I think, you paid $5,000 for this 10 acres. I said, "Yeah." He said, "I think it's going to pay for itself." And boom, it produced 10. And I still had the ground and it was still full of trees. So that worked out. And then the family I bought the original 126 from called me and said, "Hey, they had a death in the family and they wanted to sell like another 50 acres off." So I put that together as well. And then I had like, it was roughly around like 315 acres in one block.
So, and slow this down just a little bit. So what was the time frame from the 80 to now selling the 80 to the 300 now? Like 2-3 year span?
Yeah, I'd say
4.
So I sold the 80 and like maybe 3 years after I bought it. So say I'm 25. I mean, this is back in like 2006-ish. And then I bought the 130 next to it right after I sold the 80. So now I'm at like 250 some acres. Bought the 10 acres next to it immediately after that. And then like 2 years after that, I bought another like 50-ish acres.
Nope.
Looked at the aerial. I mean, I had all the cover on this block. I didn't own the whole block by far. But yeah, it was a sweet farm. I mean, that was another one that I'm like, we're keeping this farm forever. And every one of my buddies that would come down and we'd go shed hunt. I'd have my buddies come down turkey hunting and stuff. They're like, "Yeah, you can't ever sell this farm. This is a lifetime farm." And I said, "I agree." And that's not how it worked out.
There's a theme here. So when did he end up selling that piece then?
So I met my wife in Des Moines And I had maybe owned this 315-ish for maybe 4 or 5 years. Nah, I mean, I started maybe 6, 7 years into it, and then by the end, I had owned the whole thing for a couple years. Met my wife, and then all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get married, live in Des Moines, and we wanted to go to like northwest part of Des Moines. And the drive down to that farm was like 3 hours. So I love being on the farm, and I mean, I'm there for like afternoon hunts for muzzleloader season. I'm there to mow the lawn. I'm there to plant trees. So I'd be driving down 3 hours one way to go mow the lawn sometimes, and drive 3 hours back to mow the lawn. Didn't make any sense, but I like doing it. Or to, do something with the trees or plant native grasses, or a lot of times to hunt. Like I remember muzzleloader hunting for a week straight, just driving back and forth every day. And finally I said, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. So I told the wife, I said, hey, before we got married, I said, here's my plan. I'm going to sell this farm, and then I'll buy stuff close to Des Moines. So that was in 2008. And that market went just down the tubes. So right when I put it for sale, the whole housing market just crashed. And I don't remember the exact numbers, to be honest, but if I thought like 2007, if I thought I could get like, say like $3,500, I mean, it went down to like, I might be able to get like $2,800, maybe. I mean, it was a pretty good clip, but what kind of kept me in a pretty good price range where it didn't get cut in half or anything, like some tracks actually get cut in half, was just, it was set up so nice. I mean, it just laid out beautifully. It was put together perfect. I mean, the work was done. So I could kind of position it, I mean, not kind of, I definitely could position it as, a turnkey premier farm.
Yeah.
Yes. So I would say if it hadn't been for that, the price could have even got cut in half, but I still could ask a premium for it. And I got a premium for it. And then on the flip side of it, I was 1031 exchanging into a market that was in the tubes. I mean, it was garbage. So, so I could get everything at a discount, which is, I mean, clearly you can't control that stuff. I mean, it's out of your control a lot of times, but it did work out that way. And it made it really hard to sell the farm, but because the farm was set up, I mean, I kind of say to folks, like, there's always going to be wealthy buyers out there. I mean, they know they're not just going to give their money away, but when you have something that's really honed in and really dialed in and just a top shelf farm, there's always going to be people that want to buy that, and the value might come down and so on a little bit, but not like your average run of the mill farm. So, so I wanted to buy an average run of the mill farm. I wanted to buy a farm that needed totally fixing up, and I wanted to buy several of them if I could. And that's basically what I did right after 2008.
So you sell the 300 some acre farm, and then you went on a buying frenzy is kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah. I went on a buying frenzy.
So that's really interesting, because I guess there's some silver lining to that market pullback. Obviously you had a premium product of a really strong farm that still, went above market for more average farms for selling. So then what did that look like afterwards? You just went on what's a buying frenzy to you versus me? I don't know what that is. To me, it's buying one or two, but I have a feeling you probably bought quite a few.
I bought a lot of farms. I bought a really big farm that needed a lot of work. I mean, it needed like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work.
Dirt work, or?
Yeah. So it needed it had washouts, and it had cattle all over it, and the cattle just destroyed so much stuff. So it needed all the interior fence taken out. It had ponds that were like stomped in from the cows.
Wow.
It had just the timber quality. It needed TSI really bad. It needed food plots. There wasn't anything it didn't need. Now, the good part is it had a foundation. It had a bunch of timber right through the center of it. A whole bunch of timber that just needed every bit of this timber to be gone over timber stand improvement. And then I got the rotation down from getting the cows out. I put everything into row crops that I could, or alfalfa. Basically, I didn't want any cows out there or pasture, and started getting into a rotation so I could later put it into CRP, which is what happened. So I fixed everything up on this farm. I mean, literally head to toe, every drop of this timber. Planted fruit trees, planted native grasses, did tree plantings, got the blind set up right, got my stand set up right, got the food plots just loaded up, which for me, it's more for like holding the deer and for management reasons than it is for hunting even. But it just became a deer mecca. And then we killed a lot of really good deer on it too, which helped. In turn, when I started, it was mediocre at best for the size. It was a large farm, but I mean, nothing that would impress most people, to be honest, for Iowa at least. And for the size, it was not very impressive. And in maybe three years into it, it was night and day difference. I mean, that farm was just transformed and extremely good farm.
Interesting. Well, something you brought up though was, taking some of this old cattle pasture and making it into some sort of income producing, or, recorded acreage. So you can call the FSA and say, hey, I got 80 acres of a crop now. Here's my new map in order to get CRP. Was that a strategy you used often throughout this process of buying and selling farms to get income on the paper?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I have friends and family who are big cattle people, and we still to this day make jabs at each other just because I hate cows on ground. It's a personal thing for me. Yep. I get they have a place. I like eating. Well, do you eat beef? I mean, I debate this stuff all the time. So quit eating steaks. I mean, I get jabbed all the time, but they just wreck the timber. And then some of my buddies who try and do it, they're like, oh, cows and deer do just fine together. They, not really. I mean, can you have good deer on cattle pasture? Sure. But if you took the cattle out, do you know how much better it would be than that? It might be okay right now. You get rid of the cattle, it's going to be infinitely better. Cattle do not belong in timber. And then, there's just, I mean, I'm being real opinionated here. I understand, but
sure.
There was a lot of things I didn't like about the cattle. I didn't like what they did to the trees, just stomping all the roots and damaging the good quality trees and oaks and walnuts. All the waterways they'd mess up, all the ponds that people didn't fence off and they'd let them trample the ponds. And then the bigger one down here is these cattle, they'd constantly be shipping them up from down south with all these southern viruses with like EHD and blue tongue. And all of a sudden we get these new strains. And I've got the biologists out to my farm going, hey, look, I just wanted to show you how many dead deer are out here. I know not a lot of other people are showing this to you or even realizing it, but and we'd go over this stuff. And even with the biologists, they're like, this starts with the cattle. And when they're bringing them from down south, and then they tested for certain strains where they're like, yep, this is a new strain in Iowa. We have not had the strain here before. Definitely came from cattle. So there's just a lot of things that just drive me bananas about cattle. And I've always got rid of them off every one of my farms. That's me. I'm not putting my
you're buying it solely to make better deer parcel. I mean, it's all what your goals are.
Yes, income, and I'm very conservation minded. So I'm very habitat and conservation minded. So somebody says, hey, is your biggest thing deer hunting? Probably. And some people are like, well, my next big thing shed hunting, or my next big thing is turkey hunting. My big thing is habitat. I want to make this habitat immaculate. I want to make it regenerative. I've got agroforestry out here where, I've got orchard after orchard after orchard of apple, pear, chestnut, persimmon, edible stuff, hazelnut. You name it. I just want to make the ground more, not just sustainable, but regenerate it and make it a lot better than what I found it. And every single farm that I've owned, there's no doubt. I might have some opinions about cattle, this, that, or the other thing, but there's no doubt in my mind. I think anybody could say what I did with the farms, I left them immensely better than the way I found them. Immensely better. Stopping erosion. I have very little soil erosion on my farms. The organic matter that I'm building on the soil, the forest health, how I manage the wildlife. I mean, it's balanced. It's extremely well balanced. So in all facets, I would say my farms, my goal is to leave them substantially better than what I found.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Would you say, as you were, fixing these farms and getting CRP income, how important was that when you went to go list those and you could say, hey, this thing gets $5,000 of annual income? Was that part of the strategy?
Yeah, that's huge. And so it was a double win because I clearly didn't like cattle. And somebody be like, hey, well, I'll pay you $50 an acre to graze my cattle here. And I'd be like, I can make 150 off the row crop. And somebody's like, well, that is a little steep for row crop. Then I'd usually run like a alfalfa rotation on it. But let's just say it was $50 an acre to graze cattle, and I'm making that up. Some people will pay more than that, but back then that was about right, like $50. Well, I could row crop it, and even if I was making 125 or maybe 150, still substantially more. And then you're like, okay, I'm just going to row crop it so it'll qualify for CRP later. And then the CRP rate would be still at least double what the grazing was, at least double, sometimes triple, sometimes quadruple. But, grazing was usually, one, the most detrimental to the ground, and two, it was probably the least profitable for me, at least. So that's why I wanted to maximize the row crop and then get it into CRP. Any of the marginal ground, my goal was put that into CRP and help that soil out. And there's a lot of stuff I've had in CRP that I've renewed the contracts on.
There's some philosophies of people not liking CRP because of the restrictions. What's your opinion on that? Do you think the programs are good enough to have a strong, habitat improvements in correlation to deer? Or do you think that, it's because you have some people that think, well, I would rather forget the $500 of income for the 2.5 acres. I'd rather rotate my own food plots or do whatever I want or plant my own native grasses. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking like 2, 3, 5 acres, I probably wouldn't mess with it unless you're like just for a time period. You're like, listen, I just have to crunch down, and I'm just eking by to do this. I know I can do it. I mean, I don't advocate anybody get themselves in a financial position where they're just like, man, if this goes the other way, I could be bankrupt or I'd lose this farm. I don't mean get yourself in the line but if it's tight, yeah, I mean, do what you got to do. But for 5 acres or something, I wouldn't worry about it. But when you're talking about like a 50-acre field, to be like, hey, I mean, I think it's worth maximizing and going through the CRP. And the CRP nowadays is extremely attractive. I mean, the rates have came up substantially. And even stuff like the tree planting CRP, which not a lot of people want to mess around with. I mean, that used to be restrictive where you could have 2 15-year contracts. And now you can pretty much do that in perpetuity if the last executive order goes through that. So Biden put that 30-30 executive order in, and I won't get into that can of worms, but just talking facts without getting into politics. I mean, he put the 30-30 executive order out there, and that also changed the tree planting CRP, where you can basically have your tree plantings in perpetuity. So to be able to say, hey, I'm going to put a tree planting here that's 20 acres, and to be able to get 150 or $200 an acre for 30 years and then renew it after that is pretty cool.
That is.
And not a lot of people want to mess with the tree planting one, but I've got a whole lot of different blends of CRP, some on a little bit staggered higher towards the forbs, and then some a little bit denser native grass cover. And I've got some native grass drills, and I kind of tweak my CRP differently for different reasons. And but I mean, CRP is extremely beneficial. So I think it's a great program that's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Sure.
Other than maybe taxpayers spending money they don't have. That's probably the only downside.
Sure. So talk a little bit about that. So for most people in the Midwest, what's your thoughts on tree plantings? Or if you had to pick your favorite, let's say you got a 40, it has, I don't know, it's an ag country. So cover is probably the most limiting factor of some sort. There's plenty of food. What fits where in your mind? I know every neighborhood's different. Everything's different. Like, it's all situational, but if someone could just take something away from this, like, the tree plantings, pay a little bit more and it's more work, but And, just give me your thoughts on it, because I'm sure you've done all
So
programs.
I'll go through a few different levels of the tree plantings. One, I think less is more when you're starting out, because if you go out and say, hey, for the first time around, I'm gonna go plant 20,000 trees, you're gonna have some rude awakenings on how problematic that is. And I've done it. It's tough. So I would do less is more for the first project. Like, hypothetically speaking, I tell guys, like, get 100, maybe 200 trees, see how it goes. If you think it's easy, order 5 times as many next time. If you think that's challenging, okay, just spend the time to baby those trees, make sure they're okay. I mean, maybe it's 100 trees, maybe it's 50, but start small. And then specifically tree types, I mean, it's critical to be looking at different soil types. I mean, somebody can say, well, these trees are native to your area, but that doesn't mean it's good on this soil type. So getting a forester out there, somebody understands different soil types, is really important. And that's how you pick your trees. So if I'm looking at more of like a clay hillside, my tree plantings are going to be vastly different than if I was looking at rich river bottom ground that's flat, a little bit wetter areas. I mean, they're going to be totally different. So you got two components with your tree plantings, and that's one, cover, and two, food. And there's no reason you can't have both. I mean, you can. So, you got, and even within the cover, you have just your regular trees, which like a oak or something that just loses its leaves. It's kind of cover for deer, versus a conifer like a cedar, which is actually thermal cover. So it's visual and it's thermal. So, I mean, so you got cover and you got food. And then within every one of my tree plantings, I would say I do both. So I'll go mix 10 to 20 different types of trees in every planting. Like, I might have stagger a few cedars, because I don't want it to be like a cedar monoculture where it just becomes overwhelmingly thick with cedars. But I'll put cedars in there, stagger them, and then I'll put different types of shrubs, and it depends on the goal of the area and so on. But and my fruit, or my food bearing trees, will be like persimmon, chestnut, pear, crabapple. And this is not my orchard situation. This is stuff I'll like tube those. But yeah, persimmon, crabapple, chestnut, pear. I'll do different types of oaks. Like, I'll do a dwarf chinkapin oak or a regular chinkapin oak. And then if my farm is lacking on a certain type of an oak, then I'll add that. But if my farm is loaded with all sorts of white oaks and red oaks and bur oak and all the diversity, I'm probably not going to spend a ton of time adding more of that, because I don't really need it. That's just me. And for hunting reasons, I don't think the oak is probably the number one thing to focus on, but I like the oaks. So I will add some of those. And then in every tree planting, because of the cover reason, I mean, I want to create a forest. So I'll add stuff that you're like, what? You planted what? And I'll be like, yeah, I planted like sycamore and maple and I mean, the list, mulberry and hedge trees. And somebody says, what? Well, here's the thing. If you add enough trees that are fast growing that the deer are not going to destroy, you'll have a forest a lot quicker, and you can thin it out later. A lot of people used to plant ash around here. Ash isn't good for deer, but it got up really quick. And it was a good component to add. And I mean, you could still add ash today, even though we got the ash borer that's going to kill it, but it's a good tree just to say, hey, I have a forest there, and then it's going to die out. But diversity is just huge. Never, ever, ever go in and plant 1 or 2 or 3 types of trees. I mean, it's got to be, 10 trees minimum would be 10, the more the better, put it that way. A lot of diversity.
That's interesting. So, and then what about the different types of grasses for CRP programs? Do you have a favorite or a favorite program?
So every program, they'll give you a standard mix, and then I just ask them if I can make my own. So they'll be like, yeah, here's our calculator. And then I just make my own based on my soil type. So, I like the classic big blue switchgrass. I plant 2 different varieties of switchgrass. And
Cave and Rock and what other?
Cave and Rock and Canlow is probably my favorite. I think it's really diverse. Both of them are actually technically a low-lying warm season grass, but they both do very, very well on all sorts of soil types. But I planted what have I planted? Sunburst, Shawnee, Liberty, Nebraska, Alamo. I mean, I planted also. I mean, you're splitting hairs in the switchgrass. You really
Sure.
are. But my rule of thumb on the switchgrass, just to make it simple, just plant 2 varieties just in case one of them doesn't do so well. I'd say you're pretty safe with Cave and Rock and Antelope. They're excellent switchgrass varieties. And somebody says, well, I saw marketing on a new variety, and I see this all the time. You're not going to notice any difference, in my opinion.
But that's good to know. You have the experience. You've done it. So I want to talk a little bit about, so from the research I did, it says that you've owned over about 200 farms over the years and potentially more. So what are some key things that you're identifying that what made out of those 200, like what was the common theme of like, okay, well, I think there's plenty of room for improvement. This is the low hanging fruit where I can improve it and then make it a truly better farm that I can sell and make a profit.
So one, I would say there's no such thing as the perfect farm. I have buddies who find problems with, like I said, this is the best farm I've ever seen. That's 160 acres, and they will find some silly reason to poke holes in it. So there's no perfect farm. So whatever I look at, as long as it doesn't have major holes in it, I mean, if it's got horrible neighbors or something, I will, and I figure that out, which I live here. So I usually, now I've lived here for a long time, and I pretty much can find out what's going on in every neighborhood. And I avoid those if it's a really problematic neighbor.
So when people hear horrible neighbor, they could think of couple different things. So like horrible as in this, they're trespassers, disrespectful to wildlife, or like every 2 or 3 year old's going to get blasted and that's against your goals. Like what is that to you?
I've seen everything over the years. I mean, literally everything. But like there's certain neighbors that, like, if they have 10 tree stands set up and 10 out of 10 of them are sitting on my fence pointed into my property, I mean, they can do what they want. It's fine, but it does get a little bit old. And then, when they know, like, listen, because they'll ask me, or in general, people generally will ask, hey, what program are you on? And somebody says, well, I'm passing such and such. I won't shoot a 4-year-old. I won't shoot a 3 or whatever. And then they go out and they'll bring just a countless amount of guys and shoot every single 2 and 3-year-old they can. It's kind of like, why? Grown men. These are not kids. I mean, that's totally different. I get it. My kid can shoot whatever deer he wants. Kids should be able to shoot. But when these grown men are just shooting little buck after little buck after little buck, it just gets old. And then, if you've got a neighbor who's shady, I mean, I've had neighbors that I've had several neighbors where, like, one example is like, he'd ask the people around here, like, so you gonna be around this weekend?
Oh boy.
And finally people caught on. And they caught this guy in their trees. One of the neighbors caught him in his tree stand. And one of my neighbors is like, yeah, I went over, I had permission on this farm, and I looked across the fence, and it looked like they made a corn pile with a dump truck. So like just you name it. I got one neighbor where you would hear a rifle shot during bow season, and far too often, and I kind of figured out what was going on. And owning farms in a lot of different areas around the state, you're never going to avoid, having people around that are up to no good either. You can't avoid it. Every single neighborhood. We just had a big flush go through my home farm a couple years ago, where they busted the guy with, like, I think they convicted him with like 48 bucks or something.
Oh my
God. That's what he pled guilty to. So the neighbors were just finding countless dead headless deer after headless deer. It still goes on to this day.
It's crazy.
One thing that's maybe a little bit tough for an absentee landowner is, I'll be here, and we did have a pretty bad problem, but I don't want to you can't be paranoid when you own ground and be wrapped up and worried about all these different things. But, I would want to be cognizant if there's some really obvious things that are going on that are problematic. And if you're the person who's really uptight about that and you figure that out, then, that might be the time to buy something else and just to cash in and to move on. And that's not why I sold my farms, but usually I would just try and address a poor quality neighbor and deal with it, and maybe not put my food plots close to their ground or something like that.
Would you try to do anything else when you had fence hunters? Because I feel like obviously the challenge with fence hunters too is like sometimes it's this natural pinch points for a variety of reasons. Like it's a terrain feature that naturally became a boundary a long time ago and still is today. But are you doing anything different really?
So we handle it pretty much the same way every time. And I kind of call it carrot and stick approach, where we usually go to them and say, listen, we're not going to hunt on the fence. I'm not even going to hunt. I just say, hey, out of respect, we bought this farm for hunting. You have your farm. You can do whatever you want on it. Could we just propose something to you? And they're usually pretty receptive because we handle it respectfully. I mean, we want to get along with them. We don't want to burn relationships. We want to be good neighbors. And we just say, hey, what do you think about it if we both stayed, 50 yards or 100 yards off the fence? And more often than not, they're agreeable to it. So usually it works. And the people who it doesn't work, then, I'll just handle it differently. I actually won't hunt that area because usually those people end up just screwing those spots up.
Burning it out.
Yep, they burn them out. And I just avoid them. Or if they're real bad and that's a good access point for my farm, then I just end up walking along that fence to enter my farm. I mean, I'm not intentionally trying to screw up somebody's hunt. But like during the summer when I'm doing my chores, I'll just make sure that's where my entrance and exits are all the time. It kind of trains a deer to get a little further into the farm. And, and then last part of it, I just kind of chalk it up to that's part of what I signed up for.
Yeah.
I don't get too wrapped up in stuff anymore. I mean, I let my trail cameras do most of the worrying for me. I'm around enough to keep tabs on things, but I don't want to be in a situation where it stresses me out being on my farm or worrying about my farm or being a half hour away thinking, could there be somebody in there? Could there be somebody on my fence? I mean, part of that stuff's not, you can't avoid it. So
sure.
Just doesn't bother me so much.
So out of those 200 deals, did you ever lose your tail on one? Like this, oh man, we screwed up on this one. Like we're not going to make anything on this, or to speak of a pretty good track record.
I thought I was going to lose money on one, and I bought one in 2007, and yeah, it was all timber, and I paid a pretty good price for it. It had some really good deer on it. And I thought, man, I could go in and just transform this farm and put some food plots in here, clear some areas and do some work. And then 2008 hit, and I put that one for sale as well. And literally not a phone call for a year. I mean, just
oh my
nothing.
gosh, wow,
yeah, nothing. It was just dead. So I'm like, oh, this is not good. So I just held. And okay. So if I had to sell that farm in 2008 or 2009, I would have lost money. I would have been like, yep, I had a deal that I lost money, but I just kept it. And then I waited till the market came back. Let's call it 2013. Like, oh, the market's kind of come up a little bit. Put it for sale. Boom. Thing sold in a week. I couldn't get a phone call for a year. The market came back. Sold in a week.
That just goes to show the having the safety net to weather a storm so you don't lose your tail. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So I have to imagine, what's been your risk tolerance among all this time too? I mean, were you leveraging a lot of these farms, or did you build up enough cash basis to where, you had a buffer, or how did that look?
At the beginning, I would say I was okay with a good amount of risk. I mean, I still was putting, 30-40% down, but some of these farms were not like major income producers. So I had to take some of my own money and subsidize them every year, but I was okay with that. And so starting out, my view starting out when I'm 24, 25, I remember saying, I'm like, I wouldn't call myself way over leveraged or by any means, but I mean, I had some debt and I'm like, listen, if I go bankrupt at 25,
who cares?
I can recover from that.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm 55, I'm 43 now, but I wouldn't want to do this at 43 with kids, what I did then. So my tolerance for risk is definitely less now than it was when I was in my 20s. And I think that makes probably reasonable sense for most people. You know, if you have financial troubles in your 20s, you can recover. You don't want to be doing stuff like, hey, I'm going to put up my house and I'm going to do this and that when you get kids. And maybe you're towards the end of your working days. I think it's crazy to get over leveraged. And I think right now, 2022 people, I think there's a lot of people setting themselves up to get in trouble right now. I just do. I think there's a lot of people digging themselves into some holes.
You mean just like getting too over leveraged, too greedy?
Yes.
Eyes were getting too big for their stomach?
Yeah. So I live by, I mean, maybe it's Warren Buffett. I don't know who even said it, but I kind of live by the philosophy of be greedy while others are cautious, be cautious while others are greedy.
Yeah.
And there is just a portion of people right now, just a slice of that pie that is just paying crazy prices. They're not thinking through it. They do not understand this land market like they should. And they are leveraging themselves pretty hard. I mean, I deal with banks, lawyers, realtors all the time, and I'll just kind of, as a general gauge, I'll say, what's the action been like lately? I mean, are most of these guys leveraged pretty hard? How are they buying these? And I mean, there's always going to be a portion of cash buyers, and I think borrowing money is absolutely fine. But if you're borrowing a significant amount of money on a piece of ground that isn't putting out a lot of income, and you're paying substantially over probably what is even market price. I mean, there's people paying 20% over what I think they should be quite frequently, where I'm like, whoa. And if you're a cash buyer, who cares? But when you're like, some of these guys are like, I borrowed every dollar of this. I just borrowed it against another farm and it's not producing income. Well, how are you going to make that payment? Well, I have a good job. My company does well. What happens if you don't have that job? What happens if your company doesn't do well? You're going to be in trouble. So, and when the market tanks or when people get in trouble, it's not like half the people are going to get in trouble. It's going to be that slice of the pie, that 5% who are like, oh, I just wanted to do what everybody else was doing and pay this crazy price for this ground, just like everybody else was. Well, some of those people can afford to do it. When you're paying cash, I don't care if you pay twice as much what you should. You're not putting yourself in a risky spot. But when you're paying way over market and you're leveraging yourself to the max, you're looking at, well, my future income should be able to cover this. That portion of guys is setting themselves up to get in trouble, in my opinion. And it's fine. I mean, the market's been like this forever. This is human nature. This cycle has never. So it's always been like this.
Did you see this cycle happen in 2007, 2008, or like 2009? So did you see people get burnt pretty bad?
Oh yeah. I know so many guys that I will not name who went bankrupt and lost it in 2008. And
people that we know today.
Yeah, some of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you would know some of these people. I mean, I knew a lot, and they were just like, well, I know it's just going to keep going up. And look at how awesome this property is. Hey, look at this WRP ground, like wetland reserve program ground with no income. It's got giant bucks on it though, and it's $3,000 an acre. What? Are you crazy? I mean, stuff like that. I just remember countless examples. I mean, I knew a bank that it took out in Illinois because guys got so out of control in Illinois with it. So I mean, it wiped a bank out.
That's crazy. When you think about it, that is crazy.
Yeah, and so I started buying ground in 2002. Well, the same thing happened around the 2001, 2002 timeframe. Grain went down then too. When I bought my first farm, I looked at corn prices and they were $1.50. I didn't know any better. I didn't know what that meant, but it was low. And there were some people in trouble then. So we had people losing their butt in 2001. We had people losing their butt in 2008. And then, I grew up in the city, but I just study these land cycles and I want to understand them. And I just look back at the mid 80s farm crisis and stuff. And I want to understand what happened then. I want to understand what happened to ground prices during the Great Depression. What happened, pre and post World War II. I mean, there's all these different cycles that they're different in every which way, but there's always going to be an ebb and a flow. And These cycles will go on forever. The people who pay too much and leverage themselves too much and get into trouble, that'll drive the cycle back down. The interest rates will drive the cycle back down. I don't know how the cycles are going to play out. I don't know when they're going to play out, but
What's your gut? Someone's listening right now and they're like, Skip, I want to buy my first farm this year. So not something that's going to be crazy over leveraged, but they're like, Skip, I'm calling you as a friend. You've been in this business for a long time. You've bought hundreds of farms. What could you tell me? Friend to a friend.
And that is that's a great way to ask the question. What's your gut? Because that's all it is. Anybody that tells you they know what's going to happen is incorrect. One thing we know that is going to happen though is we know interest rates are going to keep going up. To what extent we don't know. But if they do 2.5 rate hikes, 0.5s, and then they do 3.25s, so we're looking at almost a 2% rate increase. That's gonna slow things. I mean, it's designed to slow things. That's why they raise interest rates. Yes, that is the exact point of why they raise interest rates. So that in itself is going to slow things, because if you have 100 buyers in the market at any given time, and you say 60% of them are borrowing money to buy land, and you make it really expensive to borrow that money, which 2% increase is that's huge, significant.
Run that in a calculator. Yeah.
Yep. So now all of a sudden you go from 100 buyers to maybe 70 buyers. And if the rates go higher yet, or we have a recession or all these other things happen, it could be reduced even more. So you got just a lot fewer buyers coming up here, in my opinion. So my opinion is this, or my gut rather is this, and I don't have a crystal ball at all. Nobody does. And usually the experts are wrong. So, and I'm not calling myself an expert at all. But when I listen to experts, I'm like, I listen to 20 of them, and 20 of them are usually wrong. But my gut tells me, I personally think the rec ground, hey, I want to hunt deer, I want to have timber, that market is going to soften, because for two reasons. I think the increase in interest rates are going to soften it. And I think there's a fairly good likelihood, in my opinion, my gut, that we're going to have a recession coming up. So the first thing that happens in a recession, and when you see the Dow go way down, you see the economy go down, people say, you know what, hunting deer is not a priority. It's not an essential thing to live my life, just like furniture or a new boat, and granted, land is a far better investment than those things aren't investments, but things people spend money on, like boats and vehicles. It's crazy what people do with that. But people will say, listen, my company's struggling right now. I lost my job. The first thing that's going to go is all those extra expenses, including that hunting farm. So I think the interest rates in a recession, a possible recession, is going to push land prices down on the rec side. On the ag side, it's a little bit different, where the commodities are just so strong right now. And my gut feeling is we've got a year or two on the ag ground before that really tightens up. But I think we've got really, really strong grain prices for a year. And I think it's a year that the inputs can't catch it. I mean, it's still going to be a very profitable year for the farmers, especially if they have any common sense and they're locking in their grain prices for this fall. Some of them now, they know they're going to make good money. So for the next year, ag should stay strong. Now, I just look at it as like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if that happens? Like, well, what if commodities do come back down? I mean, corn goes from 7 back to 350. Beans go back to 850. And inputs are really expensive. And people are in these really high cash rent rates, or they pay $20,000 an acre for this ag ground because they can sell $7 corn. They're going to be in big trouble. Now, I think we're safe for a year, but past the year, I don't think anybody really knows what'll happen. Sure. And then you just got to ask yourself, do you think $7 corn is a new normal, or do you think what we saw before, where it was usually around 350, 325, is that normal? What's normal? I don't know. But that's you got to ask yourself that question, because there's a lot of people out there, and I'll talk to them at the auctions where they're like, well, I paid this because look what I can make it when corn's $7 and beans are $14.50. I can pencil this out. That's why I bid what I did. Well, what happens if corn isn't at 7? Well, then I'm in big trouble. I mean, so ag is safe for a year. Rec is, I think rec is going to come down, and I think it could come down in 6 months even.
So if you're
6 months to a year.
I mean, I'm in the business of selling ground, so this is not my best interest to say this, but would you suggest, maybe someone just to wait a little bit? Because the double-edged sword of this is 2020, COVID hits, shutdowns happen, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, the economy's going to crash. And then we just saw like a 25% run during that time frame. So do you feel, what's your opinion on that? Like, is it time in the market versus time in the market, or is it we're in an interesting time right now, patience may be rewarded?
I would say if you're really on the edge of, man, I'm squeaking to get my farm. And I haven't had a farm before, so I know what life is like without a farm. I would wait. Just status quo for another year and see how things shake out. Double-edged sword on that is, well, interest rates could go up and make it more expensive for me later, but
ideally prices would stabilize or find where they're going to be.
Yes. Now, the ideal situation would be to buy something now when interest rates are still reasonable, but you just have to sift through so many more properties to find a good buy. Even like COVID compared to now, finding a good buy is night and day difference. I mean, I could find 20 good buys across the state when COVID
at a given
was
time.
Going on. Yeah, at any given time. If I went across the whole state, I could probably find 20 good buys. And a lot of times, I'm looking for my buddies, or somebody's asking me, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Hey, that's a great buy. I mean, there was a lot of good buys during COVID. Now it's more like 2 or 3. Instead of 20, it's like 2. It's just, people have caught on to the game, and they think because, there was some ag auction down the road that went for 20,000 that their scrub brush is worth 20,000 now too.
Right. Yeah, that's a challenge.
It just ripples through the market. Everybody thinks their land is worth gold, and it's worth a fortune right now. And you've got a few people who have some good prices where the ground needs a lot of fixing up, and there's some opportunities there. It's just really hard to find them. So I would say if you're able to do it, if you can sift through a lot of the farms and find those couple farms, I would do it now. And if it does go down later, as long as you don't need to sell it, what's it matter?
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
And if you find something you love, and even if you're like, hey, you know what? I found a farm that I love that last year I could have bought it for $4,000. This year, yeah, I got to pay for the same farm. I got to pay 5,000 or 52, but you love the farm and you're going to keep it. Over the long run, it's not that big a deal if you can do it. Now, if you're getting yourself into a financial pickle to do it, no, I wouldn't do that. But yeah, just like anything, you kind of just expect to pay more right now. And over the long run, if you overpay by a little bit, it's probably not a big deal.
Okay. That's good advice. Now, yeah, it's so interesting. It's such a weird time. It's very interesting, I think. And it's crazy to think that, even just 2 years ago where you could have found 20 good deals or 20, ideal farms versus 2 now. This is a question that I ask a lot of folks that have been in the space for a long time. Obviously, you did well over those times, over the last 20 years, buying and selling farms and, building your home farm to what you want. Do you think someone right now that's listening to this, that's 22 years old, could do exactly what you did in today's markets?
100%. Absolutely. Yes. You maybe, instead of 80 acres like I did, you scale it down to 40.
Okay.
And I talked to a lot of people, younger guys, who are like, man, I missed my window. I'm like, no, the window it will never be over. You just need to get into your first farm. I think Justin said it on his podcast, where like, he just had to get in for the very first time. Once you're in for the very first time, then you can grow if that's your wish. It's not for everybody, and heck, buying land isn't for everybody. But if you want to grow, that will never end. The time when it ends, and I was talking to a younger guy the other day about that. He's like, "Did I miss my window? Should I just throw in the towel?" I said, "When people stop dying, stop getting divorced, and quit caring about money, then you won't find any farms to buy. But while they keep dying and getting divorced and wanting money, you will find farms for sale." And there will be times where it's dry, where there's not very much on the market, but there will always be an opportunity to get into the market. Always. 20 years from now, you will be able to start with nothing, save enough for a down payment, and if you fix that farm up and patient, you know how to do it, you can grow and have a a lot of ground or a medium amount of ground or whatever you want to do. That opportunity will never go away, in
That's
my opinion.
that's
And my
encouraging.
strong belief.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's encouraging to hear because you do have some people that are like kind of Eeyore, like, oh, you missed it. Oh man, I missed my chance. And it's just it's
Oh
tough
yeah.
to hear, but then it's great to talk to people like you that are like, well, if you have the vision, you have the work ethic to make it happen. It may take you longer than what it did for me, but it's possible.
I have, I mean, and I say this with a smile on my face. I have a lot of friends who are Eeyores on the land topic, and I'm like, hey Eeyore, that's a really nice bass boat you had there. How much was that? Well, the payments are only $700 a month.
Yeah,
Hey,
you
your
can buy a
fancy
farm
brand
right
new
there.
truck.
Yeah.
Your brand new truck. That's pretty nice, Eeyore.
Yep. Yep.
How much is that truck, Eeyore?
Yeah. Yep. And it's so
just
true.
what you prioritize.
Yep.
And if you love a new truck and you love a bass boat and you think that's the way to go, fine. All good. More power to you. But don't be crying that you can't buy a farm all the time, which I see this all the time. Sometimes you got to make sacrifices. So
yeah,
common sense, but it happens all the time. And this is human nature.
What other advices do you have for someone saving up for their down payment? I mean, obviously, I mean, you did it. Like you had a vision, you had a goal. I wanted 40,000 before I went and bought my first farm. You did it. Someone listening right now, what do you suggest? I mean, would you just say avoid those money pits like vehicles or overpaying for a vehicle, or, you know, I'll give it to you. What would you suggest?
So clearly, you know, there's a million different ways to make money out there, a million different jobs that people might have. So I'll try and make this a little more broad, but you know, if you're working your quote unquote 40-hour job right now, and you don't have any extra money, clearly what you're doing right now is not going to get you in the land. It's not. So what does that mean? It means you got to figure out a better job. You got to advance. You got to get, I mean, I worked multiple jobs. Like even when I did, when I worked for a medical company, I mean, I would do little things on the side, like fix up a car or something. And I did that more in college. I'd buy cars that were kind of messed up, which kind of translates into land. I mean, I fix up land now, but I was telling somebody I bought a car that was in a hailstorm and I sanded it down and I made like, I painted it. I made like $3,000 on that car. So you got to come up with something like an extra job, an extra part-time job. And, well, I like to go out every weekend and travel, and I have to turkey hunt every day turkey seasons. Okay, you might miss a couple turkey seasons. Get another job, do something else for income. I mean, figure it out. And if you can't, that's going to be the guy that just isn't going to buy land. So you just have to figure out something to either, I mean, clearly this is economics 101. You have to cut your expenses somewhere so you can free up some money to put aside, or find a way to make more of it. Very simple economics.
That's great. Yeah. Well, we're a little bit over an hour. I want to be respectful of your time. What do we want to wrap it up or do another episode another day, or what do you think?
Up to you. I mean, this is the world I live in. I love this stuff. I love helping people out. So whatever works for you, I'm fine with it.
How about
work on the farm for the rest of the day?
How about a rain day? I know you finally have good weather there. How about a rain day or a day where you have a little bit more time to talk about deer? I have a whole other block that we didn't even get to today, which has me excited for a 2.0 conversation, but it's totally up to you.
Deal.
All right, perfect. Well, I really appreciate your time. I think what you've done is really exciting. You know, I'm 27 years old, and hearing someone that went through these phases and you know, for you to take the time to share your knowledge, I think is really special for everyone listening. So I'll give you an opportunity to plug anything you want, and then I'm looking forward to the next time already.
No, I don't per se have anything to plug. I mean, I have Iowa Whitetail. I own Iowa Whitetail, but that's purely for helping other people. The same as this. I mean, you know, a lot of people help me in my career, in my buying land endeavors. I mean, the reason I bought Iowa Whitetail was from a guy named Doubletree. He was my neighbor in Van Buren County, and he was a habitat genius. And, you know, I got to be really good friends with the guy, and he passed away. And I said, well, I had an opportunity to buy Iowa Whitetail just to help other people. And Iowa Whitetail is there for habitat, to help people buy land. I mean, just advice. And then also to protect Iowa's regulations and protect all the things that make Iowa great. So that's the purpose of Iowa Whitetail. There's my plug there, but
Mhm.
there's not a financial incentive at all. My brother does something called the 90-10 project, which is
I've
on
seen that.
Instagram.
Yeah.
And YouTube. So we do that together. He leads with that. Again, that's just to help people, to help spread knowledge. I mean, we love the conservation part of it. We love the habitat restoration. We love seeing people buy their first farms for the first time and fixing them up without any motivation, financial motivation to us. We just love seeing it done, and helping people get to their dreams and buying that parcel. We were those kids back in the day, trying to do that as well. And we were successful at it, and now we want to help other people out. So Iowa Whitetail 90-10 project. I'm really not on the computer so much, like Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. I mean,
Too
Iowa
busy.
Yeah, too busy.
Cool.
But yeah, I'm out on the farm every day, and I'll be in the tractor and getting ready to plant some corn here tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it once again, and we'll keep an open dialogue on for the next conversation.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.